Adventure Ledger presents Shadows in the Sun, Episode 7. Oliver's chest tightened as the echoes of Marco's men filled the corridors. Their footsteps pounded like a countdown, each one drawing closer. He couldn't hide much longer. Marco knew. The moment Oliver had knocked out Hector, his fate was sealed. Now it was only a matter of time before Marco's revenge came crashing down on him. The prison felt suffocating. Shadows twisted along the walls, making it harder for Oliver to distinguish threats from empty space. He ducked into a narrow hallway, trying to catch his breath. His mind was racing, his heart hammering against his ribs. What now? He was alone. He had no allies left. Cruz's men would kill him if they found out he hadn't fully committed to them, and Marco's men were actively hunting him down. He needed a plan, fast. But nothing seemed to make sense anymore. Everything had spiraled out of control. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with tension. Every noise made Oliver jump. He had to move, had to find somewhere safe, but where? He needed to think, needed to get to Luis Torres. If anyone could help him now, it was Luis. With a surge of adrenaline, Oliver made his way through the labyrinth of the prison, sticking to the shadows, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed. He could feel eyes on him, prisoners watching, guards observing, but no one made a move yet. Everyone knew the storm was coming, but they were content to let it brew. Finally, Oliver found himself outside the small, dingy cell where Luis spent most of his time when he wasn't manipulating the prison from the shadows. He knocked, his breath uneven, his mind a chaotic mess. The door creaked open slightly, and there was Luis, leaning casually in the doorway, a faint smile playing on his lips. Well, the rat finally scurries back. Oliver swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't have the energy to argue or defend himself. Marco's men are after me, he said, his voice low and strained. I need your help. Luis raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. Of course they are. You've been playing with fire, Oliver. But tell me, why should I help you now? You've made a mess of things. I can help you, Oliver replied quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. I know about the shipment you're bringing in. I can make sure it goes smoothly. Luis's eyes gleamed. So you've finally come around. Well, let's talk. Oliver stepped inside the cell, feeling like he was making a deal with the devil. The room was dimly lit, with the stench of cigarette smoke and sweat hanging in the air. Luis leaned back against a makeshift desk, eyeing Oliver with a mix of amusement and curiosity. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching out, thick with tension. So, Luis finally said, his voice smooth, you want my help, but you know there's always a price, right? Oliver nodded, forcing himself to stay calm. I'll do whatever it takes. Marco's going to kill me if I don't get out of here. Luis chuckled softly, lighting a cigarette and blowing a plume of smoke into the air. Yes, Marco can be thorough when it comes to traitors. He took a long drag, his eyes narrowing as he studied Oliver. But why should I save you? What's in it for me? Oliver knew what Luis wanted, but the words felt like poison on his tongue. I can help with the shipment, he said, his voice strained. I know the guards on Marco's payroll. I can make sure they look the other way when it comes through. Luis tilted his head, considering the offer. Go on. The prison's falling apart, Oliver continued, the words tumbling out now. Marco and Cruz's men are tearing each other apart, and the guards are barely keeping control. If you make a move now, you can take over the whole operation, but you need someone who can get close to Marco's people. That's where I come in. Luis stared at him for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. Then he smiled. A slow, predatory grin. All right, Oliver, you've piqued my interest, but don't think for a second that I trust you. You'll do exactly what I say, and if you even think about betraying me, he trailed off, flicking the ash from his cigarette onto the floor. I won't, Oliver said quickly, his heart pounding. Just tell me what to do. Luis leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. There's a shipment coming in tomorrow. You'll handle it. Make sure the guards turn a blind eye and don't let Marco's men interfere. Do this for me and I'll help you get out of Marco's crosshairs, maybe even out of this prison. Oliver's chest tightened. He didn't have a choice. He was trapped between two monsters, Marco and Luis, and both were using him as a pawn in their deadly game. But for now, Luis was offering him a lifeline. He had to take it. "Deal," Oliver said, his voice barely steady. "I'll make sure it happens." Oliver left Luis's cell feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had just agreed to help smuggle drugs into the prison. Another betrayal, but this time for a chance at survival. The line between right and wrong had blurred long ago, but now it felt like it had disappeared entirely. As he walked through the dimly lit corridors, the reality of what he had agreed to do sank in. He wasn't just caught in a power struggle between Marco and Cruz anymore. He was playing a dangerous game with Luis, a man who had already shown he would betray anyone for his own gain. Oliver was just the latest pawn in his schemes. The guards patrolled lazily, indifferent to the growing chaos within the prison. They knew the power balance was shifting, but they had long since given up trying to maintain control. Some were on Marco's payroll, some on Cruz's, and a few, Oliver suspected, were already working with Luis. Oliver approached the main yard, his eyes scanning for any sign of Marco's men. He couldn't afford to be seen right now. He had to play this carefully. If anyone found out he was working with Luis, he'd be dead before the shipment even arrived. He spotted a group of prisoners near the far side of the yard, one of them unmistakably Mateo, one of Cruz's lieutenants. For a moment, their eyes met, and Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. Mateo gave him a slow nod, as if to say, "I'm watching you." Oliver turned away, forcing himself to stay calm. The clock was ticking. The shipment was coming tomorrow, and Oliver had to ensure the guards on Marco's payroll were distracted. He couldn't afford any slip-ups. As he made his way toward the guards' quarters, his mind raced. He needed to find one of the corrupt guards who was willing to turn a blind eye, someone who could be bought with the promise of a bigger payday. But the guards were careful. They wouldn't trust anyone who looked desperate. And Oliver was very desperate. After what felt like hours, he spotted Sanchez, one of the more lenient guards who had a reputation for looking the other way. If the price was right, Oliver approached him cautiously, keeping his tone low and casual. "Sanchez," he said, his voice steady, "we need to talk." Sanchez raised an eyebrow, his expression wary. "What do you want, Matthews?" Oliver took a deep breath. He was about to take the biggest risk of his life. "Sanchez," Oliver began, his voice barely a whisper, "I know about the shipment coming in tomorrow. I need you to make sure no one gets in the way." Sanchez stared at him for a long moment, the tension between them thick. The guard's eyes flicked around the yard, making sure no one was listening. "You've got some nerve bringing that up to me," he muttered. Oliver didn't back down. "You want to keep your job, right? You want to stay on the payroll? You helped me with this, and there's more money in it for you than you've ever seen from Marco or Cruz." Sanchez's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "What are you playing at, Matthews? You're walking on thin ice." "I know," Oliver said, his heart pounding. "But if you don't help me, that shipment's going to turn into a bloodbath. Marco's men are already on edge, and Cruz's people are looking for an excuse to strike. You let this go smoothly, and you won't have to deal with the fallout." Sanchez took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me how to do my job? You're a dead man if anyone finds out you're involved in this." Oliver nodded, his throat dry. "I know the risks, but I also know that if this goes bad, you'll be dragged down with it. We're both in this now." For a long moment, Sanchez said nothing. His eyes bore into Oliver's, searching for any sign of weakness, any indication that Oliver was bluffing. But there was none. Oliver was all in, and they both knew it. Finally, Sanchez exhaled slowly, glancing around one last time. "All right, Matthews, I'll make sure no one interferes, but you better deliver on your end. If this goes south, I'll make sure you're the first to pay." Oliver nodded, relief flooding through him, though his nerves were still on edge. He had secured the guards' cooperation, but the stakes had never been higher. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. As Sanchez walked away, Oliver leaned against the wall, trying to calm his racing heart. The plan was in motion, but now came the hard part, making sure it all went smoothly. If Luis's shipment arrived without a hitch, Oliver would be one step closer to freedom. But if anything went wrong, Marco's men, or Cruz's, would tear him apart before he had a chance to run. Oliver pushed himself off the wall, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. The next day arrived with an unsettling calm, a fragile quiet that felt out of place in San Sebastián. The shipment was coming, and Oliver knew that by the time night fell, the prison would be a battleground if anything went wrong. He had spent the morning keeping to the shadows, avoiding any confrontation with Marco's men. His heart raced each time he saw a group of prisoners huddled together, whispering, but so far no one had approached him. The guards were on edge too, their eyes scanning the yard, sensing that something big was about to happen. Oliver made his way to the storage area where the shipment was supposed to come through. Luis had given him specific instructions. The shipment would be smuggled in with a delivery of supplies hidden beneath crates of food and water. Oliver's job was to ensure that Sanchez and the other guards didn't inspect the crates too closely. If the guards stayed clear, the operation would go smoothly, and Luis would make good on his promise to protect Oliver. The tension in the air was suffocating as Oliver waited near the edge of the yard, his eyes scanning the gate where the delivery would arrive. His palms were slick with sweat, his mind racing with the possibilities of what could go wrong. He had worked out every detail, but nothing in San Sebastián ever went as planned. Finally, the delivery truck rolled through the gate, the guards waving it through without much interest. Oliver's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the crates being unloaded. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until he saw one of Marco's lieutenants approaching the delivery area. Hector, the man he had knocked out, was back, and he didn't look happy. Oliver's stomach dropped. He hadn't counted on Hector being out of action for only a day. Now the man was back on his feet, and from the look in his eyes, he was suspicious of everything. Hector sauntered over to the guards, chatting them up, his eyes flicking toward the crates. Oliver could feel the panic rising in his chest. If Hector decided to investigate, the whole operation would be exposed, and then everything would come crashing down on him. He had to act fast. He couldn't let Hector get too close. This was it. Oliver's mind raced. He had seconds to decide, and every choice felt like a gamble with his life on the line. Hector was moving closer to the crates, his eyes sharp and calculating, ready to uncover whatever secret was hiding beneath them. The guards stood by, oblivious, chatting away with Sanchez, who hadn't yet noticed Hector's approach. Oliver knew what would happen if Hector opened those crates. He'd see the drugs, and the entire operation would explode. Marco would find out within minutes, and there would be nowhere left for Oliver to hide. He had to stop this before it spiraled out of control. He moved quickly, weaving through the crowd, keeping his head down until he was just a few feet from Hector. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. He couldn't use force. Not again. Hector was already suspicious, and if Oliver made a scene, it would draw attention to the shipment. He needed another approach. "Hector," Oliver called, trying to sound casual but urgent. "I need to talk to you, now." Hector paused, glancing at Oliver with narrowed eyes. "What do you want?" "It's about Marco," Oliver said quickly, stepping closer. "There's something you need to know." Hector's expression shifted slightly, curiosity peaked. He crossed his arms, studying Oliver for a moment before speaking. "This better be important." Oliver nodded, his pulse racing. "It is, but not here. We need to move." Hector hesitated, glancing back at the crates. For a moment, Oliver thought he had lost him. But then, with a grunt of frustration, Hector gestured for Oliver to lead the way. Oliver's gamble had worked, barely. They moved away from the crates, the tension between them palpable. Oliver's mind was spinning, trying to come up with something to say, something to stall Hector long enough for the shipment to clear. He knew he couldn't keep this up for long, but it had bought him precious minutes. As they rounded the corner, out of sight from the yard, Hector turned on him, his eyes dark with suspicion. "What's this really about, Matthews?" Oliver took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "Marco's making moves. There's talk that Cruz's faction is falling apart, and Marco's planning to take over the whole operation. You know how he operates. He won't stop until he controls everything. You need to be careful." Hector's eyes narrowed, but the tension in his body seemed to ease slightly. Oliver had bought himself more time, but the clock was ticking. As Hector considered his words, the shipment passed through the gates unnoticed. For now, Oliver had survived, but the noose around his neck was tightening.
This is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel and check out our other stories. You can find the link to the next episode in the description below. What do you think about this episode? Let us know in the comment section below.